Representative Aguilar, ultimately, my Republican colleagues are going to have to answer to the American people as to how they could possibly justify cutting Medicaid to the tune of $800 billion, food assistance to the tune of $200 million, all to pay for, in part, tax cuts for the richest Americans, billionaires and corporations. It's a betrayal of the middle class, and as you've noted on this program, not a single Democrat voted in support of this proposal tonight for exactly that reason. It's a reckless economic scheme that I ultimately believe will be deeply unpopular with the American people, and we're already starting to see some of that outrage in the town halls that have developed across the country over just the last few days. It's unfortunate that none of my Republican colleagues, at least at this juncture, it appears, are willing to stand up for their own constituents, but we'll have to see how this unfolds.
It's always dangerous to do budget math like live on the air, but something I think is worth noting here is that $3.5 trillion is to extend the parts of the Trump tax cuts that are going to expire, which are only expiring because they wanted to kind of like artificially reduce the size of them, right? So largely the sort of overwhelming benefits go to the wealthiest households. I think the top 5% gets about half of that value. Think about that for a second. But then because they want to add another business tax cut and more tax cuts on top of it, that's why they got to go hunting in the fields of Medicaid to try to cut that stuff to go more, right? Do I have that right?
Your math is spot on. You've articulated well precisely what this economic scheme seeks to do, and it's on the backs of hardworking Americans who rely on Medicaid, which, as you've covered extensively on your program, a lot of Americans ultimately rely on these programs. You think about the Americans in Colorado and Washington State and California from coast to coast, each of whom are trying to access life-saving care through the Affordable Care Act or through Medicaid, who ultimately will lose their health care by virtue of this bill if this resolution is ultimately signed into law. So the stakes are incredibly high, and you've articulated well why they are doing it. They are doing it to pay for, in part, because, of course, this bill would increase the deficit, as Tom Massey, a Republican member, of course, from Kentucky, has noted, and apparently Elon Musk concurred with earlier today. But it's purely to pay for tax cuts for the richest Americans. We believe that that's deeply unfair and imprudent, and we're hoping that through this process, at some point, Republicans will read the room and join us in defending working-class Americans.
I should note that they have the number that they need, 217. So this is going to pass this budget resolution. We sort of expected all day that it would, although, again, I said this with Sahil, I think it's just important because one of the dynamics here is Trump has been acting as a king or playing the role of king. He called himself a king. Elon Musk has been playing the role of like CEO, like the worst boss you've ever had in your life. And part of that is because they hate Congress, because Congress, they don't really like the constitutional order. But part of it is because they can't pass the things they're trying to do by executive fiat, right? Like, am I wrong about that? Do they have the votes to do the kind of stuff that the cuts they're doing sort of by fiat? Do you think they could pass them in the House?
I think that remains an open question, Chris. I mean, I will just say I have been astounded to see my colleagues on the other side of the aisle capitulate time and time again. You could go back to the impeachment trial of 4 years ago that you covered so extensively. And clearly, if past is prologue, that's likely to continue. But I don't disagree with you that the flooding of the zone with these lawless and unconstitutional executive orders, clearly there are some things they would like to do in the Congress that they simply don't have sufficient votes for. And ultimately, that's why they've decided on this unconstitutional course that they've been pursuing that's been rebuffed in so many federal courts. But if tonight's vote is any indication, it's clear that Republicans intend to support President Trump every step of the way, irrespective of how much harm will come to the American people, as I believe that we're going to see if this bill is signed into law.